Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
The day started like any other on my rural Washington property. The crisp September air carried that unmistakable mix of pine and damp earth, the kind of smell that made living out here worth all the work it took to maintain 6 sprawling acres. I stepped outside with my mug of coffee, savoring the warmth against the slight morning chill, and took a moment to enjoy the quiet. This was my ritual. Just me, the trees, and the occasional sound of birds flitting through the woods. But as my gaze wandered toward the edge of my property, something caught my eye. There he was, a burly man crouched low near the road, a metal rod in his hand, jabbing at the ground like he was on a mission. He wasn't just passing by. He was about 20 feet into my land, far enough that it wasn't some innocent mistake. He wasn't familiar either, not one of the usual folks who worked in the area. His broad shoulders and lumbering movements gave him an almost menacing presence, even from a distance. My first thought was confusion. Who was this guy, and what could he possibly be doing out here, digging on property without so much as a knock on the door? Assuming he was here to install the sheds I'd ordered, I called out with a friendly tone, "Hey there, who are you with?" My voice carried across the open space, casual but warm, because why wouldn't it be? I figured he was just one of the crew, here to finally get started on the project I'd been waiting on for weeks. The shed guys had been in touch about the timing, and this seemed about right. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a quick exchange, maybe a wave, and then back to my coffee. Instead, what I got was a reaction so out of left field that I didn't even know how to process it at first. His reaction caught me completely off guard. The man spun around so fast, it was almost like he'd been expecting a fight. His face twisted with anger, his eyes wild, and before I could even process what was happening, he was shouting at the top of his lungs. "It's none of your business. Get lost!" The sheer volume and aggression in his voice hit me like a slap, and for a second, I just stood there, stunned. Taken aback, I raised my hands slightly, palms out, trying to keep things calm. "But this is my property. I live here," I said, my voice a little shaky but firm enough to remind him that he wasn't just yelling at some random passerby. This only seemed to enrage him further. He continued yelling, his words becoming increasingly incoherent. I stood there, bewildered, wondering if he was under the influence of something. After what felt like an eternity of his relentless shouting, a woman's voice suddenly rang out from somewhere near the road, cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade. "He's the caretaker," she yelled, her tone impatient, like this was supposed to explain everything. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process her words against the backdrop of this man's furious outburst. Caretaker? Guy? The idea didn't even begin to make sense. Caretaker? Of what? I'd owned this place for 5 years and never heard of any caretaker. Frustration bubbled up inside me. "You're the caretaker?" I shouted back. "You can't talk to me like that. Who do you think you are?" Without warning, the man turned on his heel and stormed toward my house, his voice booming as he bellowed my partner's name like he had every right to be there. The sound of it sent a jolt of panic through me. My partner was in the middle of an important Zoom meeting, and the last thing we needed was this unhinged stranger barging in and causing a scene. Heart pounding, I hurried after him, keeping a safe distance but trying to redirect his attention. "Hey!" I called out, my voice firm but not aggressive. "I'm the homeowner, not them." "Talk to me." "I am the homeowner, not them." I called out, my voice louder this time, trying to cut through his rage. "They're busy. Talk to me." My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stand my ground, hoping logic might get through to him. He stopped dead in his tracks, then whirled around to face me, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. His face was bright red, veins bulging at his temples, and when he roared, it was like a thunderclap. "Liar!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the yard. "The homeowner is—" It was so loud, I half expected the windows to rattle. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of the situation. "I am, woman's name," I explained. "I'm transgender but haven't changed my name yet." Time seemed to stand still as he processed this information. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Then, like a volcano erupting, he exploded with rage. "You freak!" he screamed, charging towards me with a heavy metal rod in his hand. "You freak!" Terror gripped me as I realized the true danger of the situation. I'm a small, petite trans man, no match for this hulking, enraged giant. I turned and ran, weaving through the trees and bushes of my property as he pursued me, hurling slurs and threats. For what felt like an eternity, we played this terrifying game of cat and mouse. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but pure adrenaline kept me going. Just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I heard heavy footsteps approaching, but not from my pursuer. The logger who had been working steadily at the edge of my property suddenly came sprinting over, his boots thudding heavily against the dirt as he closed the distance. Without hesitation, he planted himself firmly between me and the caretaker, his broad frame acting as a barrier. Man, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, his voice loud and commanding, cutting through the chaos. His tone wasn't just questioning, it carried an edge of disbelief, like he couldn't fathom what he was witnessing. He held up his hands, palms out, in a clear attempt to de-escalate the situation, but his eyes stayed locked on the caretaker, assessing just how far this could go. The caretaker's wife appeared, grabbing her husband's arm and attempting to lead him away. But he wasn't done. As they walked off, he continued hurling slurs and threats. "I'll turn off your fucking meters, you freak," were his parting words. I stood there, shaking, as the logger asked if I was okay. I nodded numbly, unable to process what had just happened. How could a simple misunderstanding escalate so quickly into such hatred and violence? The next few days passed in a blur. I filed a police report, but they seemed uninterested, treating it as a mere neighborly dispute. My partner and I debated selling the property and moving, but we'd put so much work into making this our home. Why should we have to leave? Eventually, I decided to take action through official channels. I contacted the HOA board, naively believing they would take swift action against their employees' behavior. Their response left me stunned. "We're very sorry for the misunderstanding," the board president said during our Zoom call, their tone overly polished, as if rehearsed. Their expression was tight, a forced smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Rest assured, we've had a stern talk with him about appropriate behavior." They nodded as though that should settle everything, their attempt at reassurance feeling more like a brush-off than an actual resolution. "A stern talk?" I repeated, incredulous. "He chased me around my own property, threatening me with a weapon and screaming slurs." "That's not a misunderstanding. It's a hate crime." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Well," one of them ventured, "he's been with us for 20 years. He's not used to people like you living here." I'm sure he didn't mean any real harm. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So because he's not used to trans people, it's okay for him to threaten violence against me? Of course not. The president interjected smoothly, which is why we've instructed him to apologize. We believe that should resolve the issue. My jaw dropped. An apology? You think an apology makes up for making me fear for my life in my own home? Now, another board member chimed in, his tone patronizing. "Let's not blow things out of proportion. Nobody was actually hurt. We think it's best for everyone if we just move past this unfortunate incident." I ended the call in a daze, feeling utterly betrayed and alone. The very organization meant to protect homeowners was dismissing a blatant act of discrimination and violence. What was I supposed to do now? The following weeks were a nightmare. Every time I heard a car on the road or saw movement in the trees, my heart raced. Was it him, coming back to make good on his threats? I installed security cameras and motion sensor lights, but they did little to ease my constant state of anxiety. My partner tried to be supportive, but I could tell the stress was wearing on them too. Our once peaceful home had become a place of tension and fear. We argued more, snapping at each other over little things, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. I reached out to LGBTQ+ advocacy groups and legal aid organizations, hoping for guidance. While sympathetic, most admitted that cases like mine were difficult to pursue legally without clear physical harm. They suggested mediation or moving as the most practical solutions. But why should I have to leave my home? Why should I have to sit across a table from someone who had made it clear he saw me as less than human? The injustice of it all ate away at me. As the weeks turned into months, the initial shock faded into a constant, low-grade anxiety. The caretaker never did apologize. Not that I wanted to see him again anyway. I'd catch glimpses of him sometimes, working on other properties in the area. Each time, my body would tense, ready to run. The HOA board seemed to think that by ignoring the issue, it would simply go away. At meetings, they'd gloss over my concerns, changing the subject to more pressing matters like fence paint colors or lawn maintenance schedules. Some neighbors, hearing bits and pieces of what happened, reach out and support, Others whispered and stared, clearly uncomfortable with the controversy I'd caused. A few even suggested that if I just kept to myself and not flaunted my identity, none of this would have happened. Their words stung, reinforcing the feeling that I didn't belong here, that I'd never truly be accepted in this community I'd chosen as my home. But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like proving the caretaker and those who defended him right. So here I am, months later, still living in a place that no longer feels like home. Every day is a struggle between wanting to fight for my rights and the exhaustion of constantly being on guard. The peace and tranquility that drew us to this rural paradise have been shattered, perhaps irreparably. I don't know what the future holds. Will the caretaker eventually be held accountable? Will the HOA ever truly understand the gravity of what happened? Or will this incident fade into memory for everyone but me, a stark reminder of how quickly safety and belonging can be ripped away? For now, I'm left with more questions than answers, and a deep-seated unease that refuses to fade. This place I once loved has become a battlefield, not just against one hateful individual, but against a system that seems all too willing to turn a blind eye to discrimination and violence. As I sit on my porch, looking out over the land that was supposed to be my sanctuary, I can't help but wonder, is this really my home anymore? And if not here, then where? Why on earth are you even asking your HOA for permission to call the police? This is an urgent situation, and your first step should be to make a report to the authorities immediately. Don't wait around for anyone's approval, especially not the HOA. This isn't about getting their permission. It's about protecting yourself. After you've filed the police report, you need to find a lawyer who specializes in this kind of issue. You can't let them sweep this under the rug or push you around any longer. A lawyer will help you understand your rights, navigate the legal mess, and ensure that you're not left to deal with this alone. Chasing you with an iron rod like he's going to kill you, spewing hate, call the police, dude! That is a hate crime. You are afraid to go back to your own place, and as a consequence the Trumpers are onto you. You have suffered materially, yet they didn't fire him? A written apology from the HOA, not the perp, is an insult. He should be arrested. Washington laws are great about protecting your rights. So if the cops do give you a hard time, don't drop it. Do your research, state what codes you are protected. Here's a quick search. Washington state law prohibits harassment based on gender identity, expression, or sexual orientation, including the use of offensive slurs, names, jokes, or terminology. This is covered in the Washington Administrative Code, WAC, Section 162.3204. Here are some other laws and guidelines related to gender identity and expression in Washington state. Schools. Washington public schools must protect students from discriminatory harassment and use a student's requested name, pronouns, and gender designation in school records. Students have the right to express their gender at school within the school's dress code, which should be gender neutral. The Washington Law Against Discrimination, WLAD. The WLAD prohibits discrimination based on gender expression or identity. The Gender Affirming Treatment Act. The Office of the Insurance Commissioner investigates complaints of gender discrimination in medical coverage denials. The SHIELD Law. This law protects against lawsuits filed in other states related to reproductive or gender-affirming care that is legal in Washington.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.